Facts you believe that are actually false.
Vikings. This is the image that defined an entire culture. The Horned Conqueror. But there is a problem. In the entire archaeological record of the Viking Age, spanning 3 centuries and thousands of burial sites, not a single horned helmet has ever been found. You aren't looking at history. You're looking at a 19th century costume design that the world refused to forget. Authentic Viking headgear was the Geirmundbu helmet, a functional, rounded iron cap designed for one purpose: survival. In the reality of shield wall combat, horns would be a lethal liability. A sword or axe that would otherwise glance off a rounded surface would catch a horn, snapping the wearer's neck or ripping the helmet clean off. So, where did the horns come from? We can trace the myth back to the 1870s. Costume designer Carl Emil Doppler created horned helmets for the first performances of Wagner's Ring Cycle opera. He wanted the characters to look barbaric and pagan, drawing inspiration from ancient Celtic and Germanic headgear that predated the Viking Age by nearly 1,000 years. Because the opera was a global sensation, the image stuck. By the time 20th century filmmakers and comic book artists arrived, the horn was no longer a mistake, it was a requirement for the Viking brand. The true Vikings didn't need horns to be terrifying. Their legacy lies in their navigation, their metallurgy, and their expansion across 4 continents. Stripping away the myth doesn't make them less formidable. It finally allows us to see the real engineers of the Middle Ages. Napoleon Bonaparte, the brilliant general, the ruthless emperor, and the famously tiny man. History has branded him with short man syndrome, a symbol of an inferiority complex driving grand ambition. But this isn't history. This is a myth, carefully constructed and designed to shrink the man, not just his height. So, what was the physical reality? Upon his death in exile on the island of St. Helena, Napoleon's personal physician, Dr. Francesco Antonmarchi, recorded his height as 5 feet 2 inches and 5 lines. At first glance, that sounds remarkably small. However, the doctor was using the old French system of measurement known as pouce. When you translate those French units into the modern imperial units we use today, his height comes out to approximately 5 feet 6 inches. To understand why that matters, we have to look at the world in the early 19th century. In Napoleonic France, the average height for an adult male was between 5'3" and 5'6". This means Napoleon wasn't just average. He was arguably taller than many of the soldiers he led into battle. He was further dwarfed in appearance because he chose to be surrounded by his Imperial Guard, an elite unit specifically selected for their imposing height. So where did the little bony legend come from? The true origin lies across the English Channel. During the Napoleonic Wars, British satirists and cartoonists, most notably James Gillray, began a relentless campaign of character assassination. They depicted Napoleon as a tiny, tantrum-throwing child in an oversized hat. This was a deliberate and masterful propaganda tactic. By portraying him as physically insignificant, the British aimed to undermine his authority, belittle his massive territorial gains, and settle the fears of a public terrified of a French invasion. The mockery was so effective that even Napoleon admitted at the end of his life that Gillray did more than all the armies of Europe to bring me down.
Einstein failed algebra. One of the most comforting stories in the history of education. The idea that Albert Einstein, the greatest physicist of the modern era, was once a failure in mathematics. We are told he flunked algebra, providing hope to struggling students everywhere. But when we examine the actual records of Einstein's youth, we find that this narrative isn't just an exaggeration, it is a complete fabrication. The myth likely began in 1935, when a Ripley's Believe It or Not column published a piece titled "Greatest Living Mathematician Failed in Mathematics." When shown the article, Einstein laughed and famously replied, "I never failed in mathematics. Before I was 15, I had mastered differential and integral calculus." The confusion stems from a simple misunderstanding of the Swiss grading system. In 1896, during Einstein's final year at the Aargau Cantonal School in Switzerland, the school changed its grading scale. Previously, a 1 was the highest possible grade. Under the new system, a 6 became the top mark, while a 1 became the lowest. Einstein's report card was covered in sixes for algebra, geometry, and physics. It appeared as though he had failed every technical subject, when in reality, he had achieved perfect marks. The failing narrative persists because it humanizes a genius. We want to believe that the path to greatness is paved with relatable failures. However, Einstein's true struggle was not with the content of mathematics, but with the rigid authoritarian structure of the 19th century school system. Stripping away the myth of the math failure allows us to see the real story, a young mind so advanced that the standard curriculum simply could not contain it.
Ancient statues.
Imagine ancient Greece or Rome, you likely see a world of pristine white marble, towering ivory columns, and ghostly, colorless statues. But this vision is a historical accident. To the ancients, a plain white statue was unfinished, even ugly. You are looking at a world that has been bleached by time, weather, and a very specific cultural misunderstanding. The truth is that the ancient world was violently colorful. Every statue, every temple, and every relief was saturated with pigment. Eyes were inlaid with glass or stone, and skin was painted in realistic, lifelike tones. The Parthenon wasn't a white crown on a hill. It was a vibrant canvas of deep blues and brilliant reds, designed to be seen from miles away. So, how did we lose the color? Most of the paint simply disintegrated over 2,000 years of burial and exposure to the elements. By the time Renaissance artists like Michelangelo unearthed these statues, the color was gone. They mistook the blank marble for a deliberate aesthetic choice of purity and noble simplicity. This mistake became gospel in the 18th century. Influential scholars argued that the whiter the body, the more beautiful it is. This fear of color led curators and dealers to actually scrub away surviving traces of pigment to make the statues fit the classical white ideal. Stripping away the color didn't just change the art, it changed our history. It made the ancient world feel cold, distant, and disconnected. By acknowledging the original paint, we finally see the Greeks and Romans as they saw themselves, a civilization defined by vibrant, living color.
If you like this video, subscribe for more. Like and leave any future video suggestions in the comments.